Welcome to Mesmer Tech. This time I'm going to give you 10 tips about how to scrape efficiently. Okay, so number one, always use multi-threading wherever possible. You might be noticed that scraping one by one per page is pretty inefficient. It takes about, let's say you can scrape about 3 pages every second. Even that's a stretch sometimes. So what should you be doing? So you have two options. One, you can use async functions or async requests. It's kind of difficult to understand in Python compared to JavaScript. So I would recommend going with a thread pool or a multi-threading environment where you can actually just call a function and then that does something, and you can repeat that as many times as you want. So what I'm using in this script exactly is called thread pool executor. So you can get that from concurring the futures. This is the package that comes with Python, so you don't need to install it separately. Now with that, what you can do is you can just give it a function. So you can open it as with the same way you would open a file with thread pool executor, and max workers just means how many workers, how many kind of cores or threads you want at the same time running that function. So you can just do this executor.map. Then you give the first argument is going to be the function that you want to run. And if you have some variables, so for example with get views, I have a list and a num that I need arguments for this function. So for that, you can give it a list of those variables. So with the thread pool, it takes significantly shorter amount of time to scrape something compared to if you have, for example, thousands of pages to scrape compared to just scraping them one by one. Tip number 2. When should you use this exactly? You might want to use this for every site, but I did say you should use thread pool executor. But again, if you have a big site, then you should use this with a large number of threads. If you have a small site which doesn't notice that much traffic, you should probably not use it that much. One very important thing to keep in mind with this is if you have a lot of traffic going to a website like this, like let's say you have max worker as 50 instead of 3 of them, if your PC can handle it, then you'll be able to send a lot more requests at the same time. But if the website is pretty small and the owner is kind of vigilant in actually checking if there's an unusual amount of traffic coming in, then they might notice something, and then let's say they turn on the Cloudflare block, and that might actually lock you out of the website for X amount of hours, or they might introduce captchas or proxy locks or IP blocks, IP range blocks, all amount of things. So you want to keep in mind that these max workers parameters should be low if you think the owner is kind of cautious or the website is pretty small, and you can keep it high if you think that the website usually gets a lot of traffic anyway, so they wouldn't notice kind of this new traffic coming in. All right, tip number 3, preferably always use SHR requests where possible. Okay, as you notice here, there are a lot of products. So if you go by them or page by page, it will take a long amount of time with Selenium or something. What instead you can do, if you can see that they have some sort of XHR requests, so for example this one, here you can see that this is the product that was displayed over here. So if you do this, then it's significantly faster than actually parsing the HTML, downloading it, using something like Selenium, or actually going to this page and then requesting it, because there's going to be a lot more information that you don't need. If you compare the size of this request, the SHR request, it's going to be much less than the size of the HTML request, and it's going to take less amount of time to parse it. So that's tip number 3. On to tip number 4. Okay, so tip number 4 is always keep a backup of all the files you scrape. Doesn't matter if it's a JSON response, an API response, or an actual page like a HTML page. Always, before you're actually doing the scraping, always keep an archived copy of it on your PC or subserver. That way, if something goes wrong in the middle of the scraping, you discover that, oh, I actually had to have another field here. Let's say I missed an image tag. Oh, I needed to have the image tag. Let's say you're like scraping 1,000 pages and you discover this had like 700 pages. Now you need to re-download everything until the 700 pages. What if you discover another field that you missed? Or, for example, it can happen that your internet goes out and you haven't actually, now you need to prepare some kind of check to make sure that you're only downloading what you haven't downloaded yet. But for that, you still need to go to the page and check all the information there. Or let's say, for example, you have some exception and the program just randomly crashes in the middle of the day and you don't see, or it takes too long to figure out where exactly you ended. You need to redo all the scraping again. So instead of that, what you can do is, first step, make a list of all the pages you need to scrape. Then just download those pages onto your local computer, put them in a folder somewhere, and then instead of scraping some page on the internet, you can just scrape the pages on your local hard drive, which is much faster. And if you find a problem, you can just rescrape and there will be no network delays. It just increases the chance. Let's say you're redoing the scrape over and over. There's going to be at some point, the owner is going to think, the website owner is going to think, oh, why am I getting so much traffic for these pages? And they're going in sequential order and they don't seem to be actually doing any actions on those pages. And they might put their website on high alert and they might introduce, again, the captchas, the proxies, the IP range blocks, the IP blocks, all that stuff. So instead of that, just always keep a copy of it. That way, if there is something wrong with it or you missed a field, something, you always have a file to go back to instead of having to make an additional request or multiple additional requests. Now on to tip number 5. So the tip number 5 is about always check if there is an easily available sitemap that you can use instead of going page by page, finding all the product pages, all the category pages. So let's say you want to get to here, right about here. Now you need to go to dogs, drive dogs, and then you need to get all the categories for the dog category. Then you need to go to dry food category inside the dog category. Then only you can scrape all the product itself. But actually first you would have to scrape the link to the product and then you can actually scrape the product itself or the product page. So instead of that, usually check most of the times, because people want their site to be visible on Google and have good SEO, they usually have a sitemap somewhere. Sometimes it can be hidden like this one, because but usually they have it as sitemap.xml, like so, and you can easily find it. And that way you can avoid a lot of extra scripting you have to do in terms of scraping the category page, the subcategory page, and only finally then the links and then the products actually. Now, tip number 6, proxies. So you might be thinking, okay, so with tip number 1, if I am doing a lot of multi-threading and all that stuff, how do I prevent my IP from being blocked? Because at some point, somebody's gonna notice, oh wait, why is there like 50 requests coming from this specific IP? Are they trying to DDoS us or something? If you have a huge amount of pages to scrape, let's say in the ranges of thousands or even hundreds of thousands, I've done hundreds of thousands, either you can use some of the free proxy lists, so something like this, free proxy, and you can get it as a TXT and then parse it out. But most of the times these don't work as intended, or they give you some timeout and you need to going through them to find something that works. And even then you still have to switch, because even with the proxy, the site owner is going to be suspecting you if there's a large amount of traffic still coming from just one IP or a few number of IPs. So what I usually use, if it's in the range of, if I'm doing scraping in the range of around, let's say 100 pages and there's about 5,000 products or something like that, then I usually use the 100 plan. If it's in the range of hundreds of thousands of products and like thousands of pages, then I usually go with something like 1,000 proxy, and I can just disable this at the end of when I'm done, so I can keep the credit. So it's not actually 26 per month, it's 2 a month until you finish your whole month of having it active, having the plan active. So use that, and if you use it in conjunction with tip number 1, where you're doing 50 or 100 requests per second, then you could really you'll be finishing your entire scraping in like less than a few hours, even if it's like thousands of products. All right, and that's tip number 6. Tip number 7 is going to be about captchas, specifically Cloudflare. So if you're ever doing any scraping, Cloudflare is going to be your worst enemy. and it seems to keep on being your worst enemy because every single site seems to be using them because they're free and they provide DDoS protection. And also for the CDNs, even if they're not actually worried about any scraping, they're usually doing it for using Cloudflare as a CDN. And because of that, any abnormal kind of traffic that Cloudflare detects, it will put the website into lockdown, and then there's the captchas, proxies, all that stuff again. For just simple kind of Cloudflare, I feel like they call it Cloudflare protection, you can use this script called Cloud Scraper. It's based on the request library, and it works exactly the same as request. So you can do scraper.get some sites, and then it will give you the same. For like V3, which is what the captchas, like the current captchas are, that's not supported. So if you're in the last stretch of your captchas, then I would just advise you to take the cookie over here. So this site is probably using Cloudflare, or maybe not. There it is, I think. If I remember correctly, CF, that should be Cloudflare. So you can just copy this content directly in your script in the header part. And instead of, if you're just like 50 or 100 or even like 500, that's just gonna be 10 times copying this cookie, solving the captcha yourself. Why pay for something? And then it takes a lot of time to actually write the captcha solving part of the script as well. So that's my tip number 7. So now let's go back to the example of the dog food one. So let's go with the pagination. So let's go to page 2. So that's the one we wanted before. This should be it, I think. So let's say I want to just kind of do something similar to what this API request is doing. So just copy as curl bash. Then we'll paste that over here. And let's go to Python. Now, this will give you a good starting point. Instead of having to put all the params and everything by yourself, you just have to typing it out everything by hand. You can instead use a curl converter, or you can use something like, I think even Postman or Insomnia has it. So you can use those to get a kind of a starting point, and then you can play around with the headers, the cookies, and usually also the params. But I think because they have it a weird way over here, that's why it's not showing up. But usually you can also play around with params, and then you can create a script with this as a starting point. It makes it much easier to copy it rather than going here and doing like, okay, I need to copy that here, and copy the other thing, and then copy the other thing here, and something like that, right? All right, and that's tip number 8. Now to tip number 9. Always use a server whenever possible. So you might be wondering before, how the heck am I going to use proxies and like 50 requests a second when my computer cannot actually handle all that traffic? Your ISP actually has to handle all the traffic, and your computer has to be able to handle all the traffic. So what if you don't have a powerful computer? So what you can do is you can rent out a droplet from DigitalOcean, or I would actually recommend something like Hesner, the much cheaper alternative to DigitalOcean. And you can just spin up a server, do some like sudo apt-get update stuff, and just run your script on there. And that way you can actually turn off your own PC at night or wherever, instead of having it humming all night when you sleep. And yeah, but with this, actually one other benefit is that even if you're not using proxies, what can happen is if you're doing everything on your own computer and you're doing a lot of traffic at the same time, you might get flagged as spam traffic, even by Google or actually Cloudflare. And because Cloudflare is what majority of websites use these days, you might get locked out of your of sites you visit actually normally. Like let's say like YouTube, you might have to do a captcha when you go to YouTube or Yahoo or whatever, right? Or any site that actually uses Cloudflare. And the prices you see here is actually not how much you'll actually be paying, because this is per month pricing. Now this comes out to 14 cents every hour. So if you leave it running for about 24 hours, which is about a day, and in a day I have finished like a few tens of thousands of product scrapes, then you can easily that's like $3 for what amounts like. It would take probably multiple days or even a week for you to do the same kind of scraping on your personal computer and risk getting your IP banned by a lot of websites, even with proxies sometimes. All right, that's tip number 9. Okay, now for the final tip, this is more of a warning more than a tip, I guess. Do not get used to, or do not kind of force yourself to always use request library. Even though everything can be done with the request library, doesn't mean everything should be done with request library, because here is pretty simple stuff. But some of these things you don't understand, like what is this header? Or they can have some advanced JavaScript in their own website. Like it can be very hard to understand because everything is minified, and they might just intentionally obfuscate their own JavaScript code, and that way even if you deep dive into their own code, you would not find what the hell they actually are referencing, or how you can actually make a valid request even with if you copy something from the network tab. So that, and also there's usually captchas if they detect that if you don't have a browser window. I don't know, I don't exactly know how they do that, but it's sometimes it's pretty advanced, and I prefer to just use Selenium, even though it's much slower at that point. But with Selenium, it means that you're doing prototyping fast, you're getting the thing you actually want to do like done, and you can actually focus on the data, which is the main part where you're actually even doing the scraping, the data transformation, and actually using the data somehow, like actually either getting it to your customer if you're using if you're a freelancer, or if you're using it as a data set for your website, you can actually start working on your website much faster. So don't limit yourself to thinking it can only be done one way. Always use the way which is the easiest or fastest, and then if it's not possible with that, then go with another thing which is faster, maybe if it's not faster, if it's simpler. That way you're saving on dev time compared to running the script. All right, and that's all of the important tips. I think the most important of all of them, I would say, is always keep a backup of all your script files. That way you won't come back to the script files and then miss and then say, oh, I need to scrape this again. And it's like, oh, you've already like thousands of pages of script. I need to do thousands of pages of script again. So always keep a backup of them and just scrape them from your own computer. That way you can always revisit them later, scrape them again. All right then, and yeah, I'll probably be posting something about Django and Next.js for the next video, so be tuned for that. And let me know if you want more Python videos or more Django related videos. And see ya, bye.